ladies and gentlemen, we'd like to welcome everybody to our first ever $4 production podcast. I'd like to introduce myself first. My name is Abel Arriaga. I am a ring announcer for School of Hard Knocks Promotions and some other shows that I've done. I'd like to take this time to introduce our cast here that we have with us today. Over to my far left, Mr. David Finger. Welcome. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
And Coach Cedro Castillo from School of Hard Knocks here in Hobbs, New Mexico.
Thank you for having me as well.
Thank you guys for joining us. We'd like to thank some of our sponsors. We'd like to start off with School of Hard Knocks and Coach Cedro Castillo, F&A Fight Night Apparel, Mr. Jay Torres. Thank you for your sponsorship, and also the athlete in me, Mr. Corey King. So let's start off with some questions here, guys. Let's get this show going. First, I'd like to ask Mr. David Finger, how did you get into the boxing and the commentating? You've also told me you've done some ring announcing. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Well, timing-wise, I was a huge boxing fan in the '90s when I was younger, and that was a great time to be a boxing fan. I know like a lot of folks always say their era is the best, and right. I'm now like we got these new young fight fans, and I like to tell them, oh, you don't know how good it was back in the day, but.
So what was back in your day? Sorry to interrupt it, but what was your era? Who was the fighter in your era?
Well, I remember watching Oscar De La Hoya come up. I remember, when we had Julio Cesar Chavez fighting, the Lennox Lewis as heavyweight champ and the Riddick Bowe rivalry between Lennox Lewis and Riddick Bowe. I mean, it was a fun time in boxing.
Great fights.
And they were great fights, and it was really exciting because we had so many different opportunities to watch boxing. We had HBO boxing, which we don't have anymore.
Right.
We had USA Tuesday Night Fights, another show that's gone. The ESPN Friday Night Fights. I mean, it was just a great time to be a boxing fan. But it was sort of interesting because, and you young kids will not appreciate. You don't realize how good you have it when it comes to this information on fights, because. When I was younger, we would sometimes wait a month to find a boxing result. We'd wait in the mail for the mail to come in. The KO
there was
Boxing
no internet,
magazine. Yeah,
exactly.
The KO Boxing magazine would come in. We'd get the results. We'd start like looking at the results, and we'd find out like a month ago or 6 weeks ago.
Who owed you $5 for that bet?
Who owed me money for that fight? So then, towards the end of the '90s, the internet started to blow up, and boxing websites started to emerge. So at the time, it was a new thing. So I started reaching out and started getting some assignments covering fights for these boxing websites, and it just took off because as we're all aware, by the time the internet really took off in the early 2000s, the magazines, they had trouble keeping up. Like all of a sudden, everybody started turning to FightNews.com
right.
for their boxing news, because you could find out the next day, like what happened in the fight you were curious about. Now it's even gotten even quicker. Like now you're like watching it on Twitter. You're like catching it live that way. But I started covering fights for FightNews.com, and at the time I was living in Michigan. I covered a lot of fights there. There's an amazing boxing scene in Michigan, and then I went to law school in Colorado. Started covering fights there, and over the last 20 years, I've been covering fights all over the world.
So you started over 20 years ago this
20
journey.
years ago, yeah. My first fight, ironically enough, was in 2001. It was a club show in Lansing, Michigan, or outside of Lansing, Michigan, and then I covered in Washington, D.C. There was an Olympian named Michael Bennett. He was a heavyweight. Right. A lot of people were really excited about him. I was too. He was 5-0 at the time, and he fought a guy who was, I think, like 1-5. Got knocked out in the first round. Michael Bennett did.
Oh, wow.
And I remember I was like, there'll never be a bigger upset to me as a boxing fan than that first fight I covered, because I was thinking I was watching, the next De La Hoya, I was watching the next Riddick Bowe, the next Lennox Lewis coming up, and this Olympian, got.
You could have sworn he was the next guy.
I thought he was the next guy. He had power. He had connections. He was fighting. His first fight was on HBO, so obviously a lot of people believed in him. And this was kind of a club show. This was supposed to be just a tune-up fight for him. And yeah, huge upset. And so I remember right after I wrote my report on that, I had a lot of traffic on that story. A lot of people were like, what happened in Washington, D.C.?
Well, so everything kind of fell into place for you. That happened
really
for a
did,
reason, because that helped you get your career started.
Right.
By writing that article about that, yeah.
Yeah, it really did, and it was great. And over the years, like I said, I've covered some great fights all over the world. And it's a great opportunity, to be able to write about boxing and also like see boxing in different places, different venues, see it internationally, and it's just a great opportunity.
That's so awesome.
What's the biggest fight you covered, or some of the better fights that you covered?
The biggest fight card I probably covered, it'd probably be a tie. The Manny Pacquiao Joshua Clottey fight was in Dallas, or just outside of Dallas, Texas. I covered that. That was a huge fight. I covered Floyd Mayweather versus Zab Judah.
Oh, wow.
That was a exciting.
That's
fight.
good on your resume.
Yeah.
Definitely good on your resume. Yeah.
That was a pretty good fight.
That was, and I kind of thought, Zab might had a pretty solid shot at it. So it wasn't your typical Floyd Mayweather fight where you're kind of like,
Well,
this
he was
guy's
as
not gonna-
fast as
Yeah.
fast as Mayweather, if not faster.
He was. That's one of the rare times where you're watching Floyd Mayweather where you had like a little bit of a doubt like how the fight was going to go. Like a lot of times Floyd Mayweather, he was just such an elite fighter. You knew that like how the fight was going to go. There was maybe 6 or 7 fights towards the end of his career where you're kind of like, yeah, maybe this.
Hopefully they can even touch him.
Yeah, maybe.
He was more of a defensive fighter there towards the end.
Right.
Yeah. Coach, let's get back to you to ask you a question about this podcast, $4 podcast. Okay.
A $4 production podcast.
Yes, sir. How'd you come up with that name, and talk to us about that?
So my very first show that I promoted, I had a sellout crowd at Club La Sierra, and man, after I paid everybody off, it's crazy to have a sellout show, and then you pay everybody, you go through, you pay the hotel, and you end up with $4
Profit.
So, profit.
Wow.
So I was told by the some promoters I know, and by some people from the athletic commissions, that if you break even, you're doing really well for your first show. But man, it was so stressful, and it wasn't good enough for me,
Right.
So I kind of went back, reassessed everything, and I come up with a different blueprint for my shows. And
Right.
so, but to have a sellout show and only walk away with $4, man, it's.
But as
very
I said,
frustrating.
if you even would have broken even, it was a success. So to come
Right.
out with $4, you know what? You did good for yourself.
Well-
So don't cut yourself short on that one.
Well, there's a lot to it, though. At that time, the New Mexico Athletic Commission, who I do still do my promotions through, it was a different commission, and I was taken to the bank by them. They came down to Hobbs, the casino. They went out to the casino. They met a bunch of women. They brought them. They brought them, and on the inside of where the ring is, I can't think what it's called. Where they keep the judges and whatnot.
Right.
They asked for 20 seats around, which at that time I was selling for 150, and they're like, "Hey, these are my special guests." They brought 20 women in, set them around
wow.
there, and they said, "This is part of what we do." So I was like, "All right." I had no idea that they weren't supposed to do that.
Right.
And prior to that, I was only supposed to get 6 rooms for the New Mexico Athletic Commission. When I got there Sunday, they charged me for like 13 extra rooms. So I ended up paying extra on the hotels, and then I lost out, 20 times 150, whatever that is. And it was over $5,000, that could have been
Unexpected,
profited.
right, yeah.
So I had,
Even though you're not in the ring, outside of the ring, you're still taking hits.
absolutely, absolutely, man. And those were some pretty good hits that I took in at that time, But things have changed. I've grown and I've learned from that very first show. I know everybody wants to get paid well as a fighter. I kind of brought the pay scale down for all the pro debut fighters, and it's actually helped out tremendously to benefit my promotional company.
And the same question I asked Mr. David over here. How did you get into boxing? I know there's a history in the family
Oh,
of
absolutely.
boxing, so tell us a bit about that.
So my grandpa, he was a boxer, and then he became a coach. He coached my uncles, and he coached for 27 years. I was a fighter, of course. This is my mom's dad, and we got into boxing. Me and my 3 brothers. Between the 4 of us, we had well over 600 fights.
Wow.
And I was gassed with H2S back in May 25th of 1996.
I remember that.
It took them 13 minutes to revive me. I couldn't fight no more. So at that time, about 2 months later, I started coaching with my grandpa. I started coaching my brothers and some of the other fighters that we had. And I couldn't fight no more because I was brain damaged and I had respiratory problems. And he quit soon after that. He retired from coaching, and we were the Hobbs Boxing Club. Like I said, he had it for 27 years. Here in August, it'll be 25 years for me as a coach. So we had boxing in our family for 52 consecutive years. My son's a fourth generation fighter. In fact, my son is the most successful of us because he's the only one that's turned professional.
Right.
I mean, I had an uncle. His name was Flory Velasquez. Back then, they called him the Golden Boy. He had over 300 amateur fights. He fought Robin Blake. Do you remember Robin Blake? I think they went 1-1 as amateur. Robin was a very successful professional fighter.
Nice.
And my uncle didn't turn pro, but my youngest brother Alicia was a national champion. He's a scientist now, and I one time I asked him about why he didn't turn professional as a boxer, and he's like, man, I don't even like to fight. I just did it because you do,
Right.
because you guys did, and he was pretty successful. All my brothers, they did really well, and but I feel like I enjoy coaching more than I did fighting,
Right.
now that I've been doing it for so long. 'Cause,
Yeah, and you're great at it. And now, New Mexico, Texas, and a lot of areas have met you. And you've gotten to work with Showtime Boxing, right? Get some fight cards together. And tell us who else you've worked for already.
Well, I've done some matchmaking for Top Rank, for Golden Boy, for Mayweather Promotion, for Thompson Promotion, and then
Just a little guy out of Hobbs, New Mexico. Good on you. Good on
appreciate
you.
it. Yes, sir. I've been working hard, and then there's 4 promoters here in New Mexico, and I help the other 3 promoters with some of their matchmaking as well. And then of course I do my own shows, and
Right.
I do all the work. I
Busy
do
man.
my own matchmaking and promoting, and I enjoy it.
Yeah, and as well as Mr. David over here, tell us about some of the most known fighters nowadays that you've worked with here lately.
Well, I just want to add on one story with where Cedro was talking about his first fight card. Let me just get this out, because I remember at that point I've been covering fights for years when I covered his first show here in Hobbs.
Right.
And I can't tell you the number of promoters I met who were so excited to be doing their first fight card, and I'd go and cover their show, and I'd look around and there'd be an empty stadium, and I could see the promoter looking around and being like, I just lost my you-know-what on this
Yeah.
show. And so after the show we were talking, he's like, man, I think I made like $10 or something. And I was ecstatic. I was like, man, that's great, man. And he was just like,
$10
come on, man.
He goes, did you hear
I
me
didn't
right?
I didn't make any money. And I was like, no, but you didn't lose money, man.
Yeah.
That's the key,
Yeah.
for your first show.
Yeah.
But it was kind of it was a fascinating thing, because I could see that Hobbs and in this part of the Southwest and Southeast New Mexico, there was a huge market for boxing. Because like I said, when I covered in Denver, I don't know what it was. Maybe there was just so much going on in Denver that you didn't have to go to a fight card. There was so
Right.
many other things to go. But I remember going to like a WBC title fight. It was a Continental Americas title fight, but a WBC doubleheader with 2 WBC title fights, regional title fights, and there was I think like 50 people in the audience, and after the co-main event, everybody left. It was me sitting ringside for this WBC top 10 contender defending his title belt, and there was
Wow.
like me and like 3 people in the audience, and I think one of them was just like sitting there finishing his beer. He wasn't even paying
Wow.
attention. So it was a great fight scene here. Working with some of these guys, I've covered fights with a lot of I've covered a good chunk of Isidro shows, and I've watched these fighters come up, and I get excited too because I want to see these young fighters come up, especially from a fighter that I can cover his career early.
Right.
I remember early on one of the an official from the WBO called me and said, "Hey Dave, there's this kid out of Africa. You really ought to pay attention to him. His name is Isaac Dugbe." And I was like, okay, yeah, so I looked him up on YouTube, and I was like, yeah, this kid's pretty good, but I don't know who he's fighting. I don't know who this other kid from Africa he's fighting is.
Right.
But I started paying attention to his career, and then I covered one of his fights in New Zealand. I was actually working the undercard of Joseph Parker and Andy Ruiz for the vacant WBO title. He fought on the undercard now, and at that point,
That was a good fight, by the way.
That was a great fight. Yeah, that was a great fight card to cover. And watching Doug Bay on the undercard, I was like, man, this kid really is good. And so, at the time, nobody was really paying a lot of attention to him. So we kind of developed a friendship, and I started covering his fights and keeping in touch with him, and watching his career progress was just an amazing thing. And that's one of my big goals, is to see that happen in this part of the state, where we get these young fighters. And I've seen fighters who've got come through, who've got that talent, and I'm really excited for the opportunity, because talent only gets you so far in boxing, as you know.
Yes, sir.
There's a lot of fighters who could have been great, and they didn't take that next step. And there's a lot of fighters who stumbled early on, but they kept working hard, and then next thing you know, they're at the top of their game. And one of the things I tell young fighters is there's a guy named Jorge Juarez. Have you ever heard of him? Fighter
I
named
have
Jorge
not.
Juarez. Have you heard of him, Coach?
No, sir.
Jorge Juarez has got a record of 8-27-3. 8 wins, 27 losses, 3 draws. That's his
Wow.
record. You want to know the thing about him, though, is he held Canelo Alvarez to a draw.
Wow.
Seriously.
Early in Canelo's career, and he fought this guy, and I can't tell you the number of fighters who had a fight like that. Young undefeated kid or a young prospect, and he fights a guy who's 8-27 and is held to a draw, and he just throws up his hands. He's like, man, I'm done. I'm done with
Oh,
this.
yeah, absolutely. Look where he's at now.
Yeah, and look at Canelo, didn't take no for an answer. He's like, he was a young kid. He's like, man, that was a setback, but I'm gonna keep working hard. And so, I see a lot of these young fighters, and sometimes people will say, hey, man, he struggled with this guy who was 8-27.
Right.
Well, guess what? So did Canelo, and Canelo kept working hard. So I really want to see that.
I'm
with
glad
some
you
of
threw
our
that
young
out there,
fighters.
because young fighters that are listening in on this podcast can
Right.
take that in and be like, hey, if Canelo can come from that, losing
Exactly.
to or drawing to a guy that's you said 3-27 or whatnot.
8-27.
Yeah, I'm like, why not? Don't give up,
Right.
because you never know what could have, should have been.
Exactly.
You never know.
Exactly.
I mean, my very first show was July 10th, 2010, and so I've been promoting for, at least as a professional promoter, for 11 years. Man, and I've seen tons of fighters, tons of talent. I remember one of my very first show, I had a kid named J.J. Vasquez, who was a world champion amateur fighter on my card. He was like 2-0, and I thought the world of him and his family, man. His couple of his brothers, they fought my younger brothers, and they all had over 100 fights.
Right.
The Vasquez family and my brothers, and it was this war. I think they went like 3-3 versus each other, But then these kids they just fall off, man, and it's a shame to see so much talent go to waste. But unfortunately, that's the way it is.
Yes, sir.
I had a question for you, Abel. So, I'd like to know about your history of boxing.
My history of boxing is actually short. It's very, very short. And I'll tell you how I got into it, by accident and being at the right place at the right time. I'll tell you a little bit about my history. First, I grew up in Hobbs. I started DJing in 1998. That's when I knew that, I love the microphone. I love talking to people. I love being in front of a crowd. I started as a DJ, and then later in the future we met, but we had known each other, but we weren't close. We really didn't hang out or nothing like that. And it's because of this man here to my left, Coach Cedro Castillo, that I got into boxing. And not so much into boxing, but into the art of boxing, the announcing, the being part of the show. He heard me on a microphone. He goes, hey, I've heard you on a microphone, and I like how you sound. Have you ever thought about ring announcing? And I was like, I've never thought about it, but I'll give it a try. And he goes, well, how much are you charging? I'm like, I can't charge you for something I don't know if I'm good at it or not. So I said, let's just take a shot at it. And he opened the door for me. And that's how it started. I did my first show, and it was nerve-wracking. And to this day, it still is when you first walk in there. You get those jitters, you get those butterflies in your stomach. You don't know if you're going to mispronounce somebody's name or mumble a word or whatnot. And that's how I started with you and because of you. And I wasn't ever really big into boxing, so I don't know the history of a bunch of fighters. Like, a bunch of you guys have, been working your butts off for 20 years, and here comes little old me, and because of Coach here, doors have opened up for me.
What promotions have you worked for?
School of Hard Knocks, my favorite.
My man.
And from there, it just took off with Coach. Other promoters would be at his shows, and they would be like, "Hey, we want to use your guy for our next show." So it started in Hobbs. The next thing I know, I'm doing a show at La Hacienda in Midland, Odessa area, and that was I don't remember the promoter's name. It wasn't Montoya's. No, Montoya came in after that.
Well, it was Golden Eagle, but
Golden Eagle, that's right.
The Montoyas were like
They were in attendance at that show, and that opened up another door for me. So it just started snowballing, that snowball effect.
And I think that show, that night you were the announcer for some boxing, and the very next day you came and announced my MMA fights.
Yes. Yes,
sir.
and Montoya's Boxers Gym out of the Dallas-Fort Worth area were there at La Hacienda when I did that one for Golden Eagle, right?
Right. Yes. Sir.
And they saw me and they were like, "Hey, who are you? Where are you from?" And I told them, I just started doing this about a year or two ago. And they're like, "Well, you're really good. We want to bring you up to Dallas to do a show there at the Bomb Factory." And I remember that one when I showed up. I was treated like I was a celebrity, like I had been doing this for so many years. I walk in, "Oh, Mr. Arriaga, Mr. Like, hey, get him this, get him that. Come on, we're gonna take you upstairs, a VIP." And I'm like, at the time I was looking at my girl, and I'm like, just go along with it. So, I had no idea, what to expect. But when I got there, I was treated like I was a celebrity. And I'm like, little old me out of Hobbs, New Mexico, beating thousands, if not millions of people around the Dallas, Fort Worth, Houston area. They picked me. I was like, right
amazing.
place, right time, and I'm just blessed. And that's how I got into it, because of this man right here. And I got to do a show for Roy Jones Jr. That was about 3-4 years ago, give or take a year. And I was supposed to be the main ring announcer for a televised show. And when the production crew and everybody that was working that show, they found out that it was my first live show, they panicked. So I lost the television part, but I still got to do the undercard. They flew in Thomas Strieber, very well-known, professional ring announcer.
Very good ring announcer as
It's
well.
been on HBO, Showtime, you name it, he's been on it. And that man right there, he treated me great. He gave me tips. He told me what to do, what not to do. Gave me a bunch of tips. When my time came, I'd be ready. So I've also worked for Mikey Garcia, Sweat Boxing, Montoya Boxing over there in that area of the Dallas-Fort Worth. But
What do you have? What's coming up for you? What's in the near future for you?
the near future, and this
Ring
call
announcing.
this call literally just came in yesterday, and I got the official on it. Marco Antonio Barrera versus Eric Morales, July 16th, there in the Dallas-Fort Worth area. They picked me to do that live show.
That's
Blessed
way
again, perfect. And if that first door hadn't opened with you, Coach, I would never be where I'm at today, coming up in this ring announcing world. And
Well,
so I'm super excited about this. So you guys are the first to hear it and me to announce it here on the podcast. I
pretty
get to be the ring announcer live, and
For
they
some
don't know if
legends.
it's going to be on the Zone or on ESPN, but I get to be a part of that show.
And those are two legends, man. Marcos Antonio Barrera and Eric Morales.
Right.
And they,
It's going to
they've
be a
had
war.
some
It's an
war.
exhibition match.
It's an
Let's
exhibition.
put that
but
out there.
trust
Yeah,
me,
today.
they'll be going to war.
But they'll still be going to
Yeah.
war.
I don't know though. They kind of became pretty tight. They used to hate each other back in the day, and now they're kind of tight.
But I think once
friends.
they get in that ring and they hear that bell and they look at each other, they're going to
That's true.
remember. I remember how you hit me, so it's my turn.
Well, it's funny. I will do a little throwback here. Years ago, this back in the '90s, there was a fight between a guy named Maurice Blocker and Simon Brown.
Oh yeah.
And it was a weird thing because they were best friends in real life, but they were both welterweight champions, and it was a unification fight. And or I think it was welterweight or junior welterweight. I don't remember
I
exactly.
think
but-
welterweight, I believe.
I think so, but so they fought each other, and I remember at the time, the Showtime commentators the whole time were like, "Man, these guys are such good friends," and it's such a, they were talking about how difficult it was to fight their friends, and then at the end of the fight, Simon Brown almost knocked Maurice Blocker into like next month. I mean, that
Oh,
was
wow.
a
Yeah.
brutal knockout, and I was like, man, if they're friends, I'd hate to see what he'd do if they were enemies.
I remember that fight very well.
Yeah.
It's all business.
It's all business once that bell rings.
And you were talking about being nervous and getting butterflies. That's exactly how a fighter feels. I mean, I remember from my very first fight to my very last fight as an amateur fighter, and it didn't matter how many fights we had and how much experience we had, I was always nervous. And you'll always come across fighters who will tell you, "Oh, I don't get nervous." They're lying. I promise you. Every fighter before a fight gets you
The
know,
best of the best get nervous.
yeah, I mean, it's just
That's
it's
what
just,
keeps you on your toes.
Absolutely. Yeah, man, I'm pretty excited for you.
Thank you.
And you know what's crazy is I told this man right here. I said I made a post and I said Abel will make it further than any fighters around this area, and he'll get that opportunity. Before
I remember that post.
These guys, before these fighters, these up and coming fighters, because I had good fighters in my gym, you know, and but it's so hard to break into the boxing scene as a professional fighter, and you got to get all these local wins, and then try to get your shot. And granted, like my very first fight, my main event fighter Edgar, he was my main event fighter. I took him to 7 nationals, and I remember the kid. He was a good fighter when he fought for me, but he didn't progress like we thought he would, you know. And it's a shame to have that much talent, but with Abel, you just seen, you know, good quality about him that he would do real well in the boxing scene. It's pretty awesome.
Thank you.
And hopefully one day we'll be seeing him on HBO, like you said, DAZN, Showtime. I mean, HBO is no longer around, unfortunately, but you know.
God willing, in good health, I'll be there.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
So I got some breaking news as well. We'll be having a New Mexico Athletic Commission meeting. The New Mexico Athletic Commission will be having a meeting June 4th, which will be Friday, this upcoming Friday, and we'll get the go ahead. It's already been approved for the bare knuckle fighting. So I'm going to try to be. I worked about 2.5 years to bring it to New Mexico. I implemented all the rules. In fact, here's one of our belts. It was I had it made a few years ago, or 2.5 years ago, for one of the meetings. I brought up to the meeting to the New Mexico Athletic Commission, and we'll be having bare knuckle fighting here in Hobbs ASAP.
Give us a little bit of detail on this bare knuckle fighting, because around here, I don't think anybody's familiar with it. As far as how does it work when you say bare knuckle? What kind of padding or wrap or what goes on their hands? The weight classes? Is there a weight class? Ages and so on?
So you can have wraps up to about 1 inch back of your knuckles, but you can't have it on your knuckles. That's why it's called bare knuckles, and there won't be any gloves, of course.
But you have to have some kind of wrap.
You don't have to.
Oh, you don't have to?
You don't have to. It's better if you did have it. It's more like tape, or you
Right.
can have a little bit of gauze to protect your wrist, but you can't have it. Like I said, it's got to be about 1 inch behind your knuckles. So one of the rules that I had that was taken out was spinning back fists. They do that in MMA. They don't do it in boxing. And since this isn't really boxing, it's bare knuckle boxing. I threw that in there to make it a little bit different, but the commission took it out. They said they'll, within time we'll probably put that in the rulings. We're going to have amateur bare knuckle fighters and professional bare knuckle fighters. I've been getting hit with all kinds of people from across the nation who want to be a part of the show. There's only been a handful of people from New Mexico who've actually done it. The Pettis brothers, Gene and Derek, they've done it.
Right.
They do anything. They'll fight.
Yes, I
anybody.
remember those two guys. Those
Yeah.
guys are warriors.
They are.
They
warriors,
remind me
man.
of the Diaz brothers, if you had to
absolutely.
compare them to somebody.
Absolutely. It's crazy because they don't have the best of records, but man, like you said, they'll fight anybody. I remember calling Derek, not to get away from bare knuckle fighting, but make this real quick. I called Derek the day of a fight. I got him like $5,000. I said, hey, they need a fighter for this guy. It was like 2 weight classes above.
Count me in.
He said, send me the flights.
Yeah.
Sent him the flights. He went to Dallas and whooped the guy's butt.
Wow.
Yeah, man. So it's pretty cool. And that was an up and coming fighter. But anyhow, to get back to bare knuckle fighting, Leonard Garcia, he's from Texas, West Texas. He just won one of the biggest fights in bare knuckle fight in history in terms of the current day bare knuckle fighting. He just hit me up. They kind of want to do like where the main bare knuckle fighting promotion company wants us to do like how would you say, like tryouts.
Right.
But no disrespect to that, I want to do my own thing.
Yeah.
I have my own promotional company. I work real hard to bring bare knuckle fighting in. I'm hoping to bring Leonard down as a special guest. We've already talked about it. But in terms of bare knuckle fighting, I want it to be School of Hard Knocks promotion,
Right.
and I want to give these beautiful belts, start my own league.
Of course.
So with my first event, it's going to be a dual event. It'll be bare knuckle fighting and boxing, because I have local fighters here who I'll have on the card, who I'll need on the card to make sure we sell tickets. Because some of like my fighters here in my gym, I don't want them to be a part of bare knuckle fighting. Like my son said, "Oh, let me do that, Dad," you know. I was like, "No, man, you're not going to do that." I mean, it's a different monster. I think he would do real well just because of, you know, he's a good fighter. But it's not something I want to see. You know, see my own kid doing it. You know.
Gotcha. Dave, have you ever got to work with anybody in this bare knuckle fighting industry? Do you have any experience in that, and what are your thoughts on it?
It's a pretty recent phenomenon. I know I was asked to cover a show in Wyoming a couple years back. It was a bare knuckle show. I didn't end up going because I had another fight that I was covering at the time. You know, I'll be honest. I watched Paulie Malignaggi's bare knuckle fight, and I was like, man, I don't know. That's pretty harsh. You know,
Right.
He had a pretty bad cut, but I'm definitely curious to see how it progresses, because it looks like it's a. I mean, I kind of agree with Coach. If I had a young fighter, up and coming fighter, I'd be like, let's just focus on the boxing thing. You know,
Yeah.
And so you don't need to break your hands, or you know, you don't need to get a bad cut or anything. But I think for the fans, you know, I think it's a great opportunity for you know, some exciting fights, because you know that. One of the things about Malignaggi was, you know, as a fighter, he wasn't a big puncher.
Very technical. Though.
Yeah, very technical, but not a big puncher. So
And
he was out of his element, I think.
I kind of thought he won, though, to be honest with you.
Yeah, I did too. Yeah, I mean, I thought it was a good performance from him, but it was one of those things where I was kind of like, man, that's a tough thing.
And just because you're a boxer doesn't translate to being a good bare knuckle fighter. I'm not saying he wasn't good, but I know Chop Top Corley just got beat.
Really?
He got stopped, I think, in the third or fourth round.
But I also remember when MMA first came out, and you had all these boxers getting into MMA and thinking, well, you know, I'm a good fighter,
Right.
and they stopped there, and it was like, yeah, being a good boxer doesn't necessarily translate into being a good MMA fighter if you don't prepare for it. And so the best MMA fighters who come from boxing are the ones who kind of step away from boxing and say, okay, I'm an MMA fighter, and I think our most notable is Holly Holm. You know, she you know, she didn't do this as a pastime. She didn't do it like, you know, I love him to death, but James Toney was kind of like, you know, hey, I'm gonna try out this MMA thing as a side gig.
Randy Couture made him look like a fish out of water.
He really did, yeah, and that's why you gotta, you know, if you're gonna get into bare knuckle boxing, I think you're gonna have to step away from boxing, because you're stepping into a new element. You can't do this as a side gig. You gotta.
No.
You gotta
And all
focus
this is
on
new
that.
to me, the bare knuckle fighting. So tell me a little bit more as far as like, how many rounds does bare knuckle fighting go? Is it the same as boxing? And I know I can only imagine the bloodshed when it comes to bare knuckle fighting.
Well, there-
Big difference between that and boxing, I'm assuming.
Absolutely, but here's the thing about what people don't realize is that they're not going to take as much punishment, because a lot of times they're going to get cut, the fights are going to get stopped faster, the rounds are less. For amateurs, it's 3 rounds, and for pros, it's 3 rounds, and for championship fights, it would be 5 rounds.
How many minutes?
2 minutes.
2-minute rounds.
Yes,
of
sir. So-
pros and amateurs.
Pros and amateurs. So there is a little bit rules that are different, but you know, we just it's like you said, it's a new sport. It's like when the UFC came out, it was Ultimate Fighting or Ultimate Fighter, I believe. I can't remember, but it's something new. It's going to be hot in this area, you know. So
Right.
we're trying to bring it, and we're trying to do something special here in New Mexico, man. And I think it's going to be good for our city and for our state, because I already got a call from a casino, a gentleman that used to work here at Lee County Event Center. He runs a casino.
Right.
He wants to bring School of Hard Knocks promotion to their casino in Albuquerque area
Awesome. It's great.
for bare knuckle fighting. Yeah, so doors are opening. It took a lot of hard work and a lot of patience to get it kicked off. I'm pretty excited, man, because I think that it's going to be something pretty entertaining for the fans and for
School
all
of
the
Hard Knocks is extra busy right now.
extra busy, man. I got some stuff that we're working on. We're also working on a few years ago. I got the Tough Man contest approved here in New Mexico, but we never followed through with it. And just so you know, before I promoted professional boxing, I did do like 4 Tough Men contests and 1 tough women contest. And I probably shouldn't be saying this, but it doesn't even matter. That was before I became a promoter. But they're not legal in New Mexico, or they weren't at the time.
Right.
And we're bringing that back, and we're planning to do a show probably in Clovis to help Eligio Sena. He's starting a new gym, and we want to do something different to raise money for his gym. And so I'm going to use my promoter's license to help him out and help my promotion out to bring something different to our area, you know. So I'm pretty excited for that. And,
It sounds
you know,
exciting.
it is exciting. And you know, my last 2 shows I did were at Corral Arena, and it was a dual event. We had a professional boxing event and a professional MMA event, and we had both the ring and cage up. I'm not saying it was the first time done, but it was one of the first times we did it consecutively, September 2019 and December 2019. So we had a MMA and boxing show. And it was a little different. It was a lot of hard work because it takes a lot to put the rings up.
I was there, I
and the cage.
remember.
Yes, sir. But so we're just trying to try different things, man, and get out there and get our hustle on, work hard, keep these fighters busy, man.
And speaking of fighters, not to bring that up, what fights are you two guys wanting to see happen with the fighters in the with the fighters here in the southeast and southwest Texas area? What fighters do you guys want to see go toe to toe? That there's been talk but hasn't been done yet.
Well, for me, I have about 5 or 6 fights that I would like to have made. I mean, we have a local fighter, Oscar Espinoza, who fights out of the works.
El Gallo.
El Gallo.
El Gallo.
Yeah, Oscar, man, he'll fight anybody too, you know. But there's 2 fights for him that I would like to see, and that's with Rico Yorquizo out of
Showtime.
Clovis,
Mr. Showtime.
Showtime versus El Gallo, and Des Hill versus Oscar Espinoza.
Desmundo.
Man, those
That would be a great fight. And we've had these two guys go toe to toe, face to face in the ring.
Face-to-face.
Interviews. We've had interviews, and the crowds around here, they're excited. They
They're
want to see
excited.
that happen. What's it going to take to make those fights happen?
man.
Is it the weight class? Is it the
Well-
money? Is it the timing?
I think it's a little bit of everything, man. You know, I think I know Des been calling for that fight for a while. Oscar says he wants to fight him, but there's a lot of people who want to fight, who Oscar wants to fight too. You know, so it's kind of one of them deals. Rico, for instance, has fought Oscar. I mean, has fought Des, and that was a war, man. It was in Odessa at the County Coliseum. Man, that fight, I think the fight stopped with 10 seconds. It was back and forth. They both hurt each other. You know, some people question the stoppage, but nevertheless, man, that was an excellent fight. For me, to make Des and Oscar fight, or Rico and Oscar fight, you know, we just got to get them all to agree, you know.
Right.
Another fight that I like to see is undefeated fighter, Hobbs, New Mexico School of Hard Knocks fighter, Mario Gonzalez versus Luis Luna. Luis is from Seminole. He's an MMA fighter, but he's 2-0 as a professional boxer.
Is Luis Luna the guy that served in the military? Or am I thinking about?
No, sir. No,
He's
sir.
from Roswell, I believe. Then. Okay.
Yeah, no. Lewis is actually an MMA fighter, and I made a fight between Luis Luna and Des Hill, which was a fight that had been brewing for 7, 8 years, and nobody could make the fight happen. These guys had so much animosity. We made this fight. It almost reminded me of Julio Cesar Chavez versus Meldrick Taylor, where Luis Luna jumped off, got the first round. Second round was rather close. Third round, Des was mauling him, man, and with literally 5 seconds, 6 seconds left, Des had him in a chokehold. They thought the referee stopped the fight, and the bell went off, and then Lewis got the win. But one of the best MMA fights I ever put together. Eric Gutierrez was my partner, and he was communicating with Lewis. I was communicating with Des. We made the fight happen. It was great. It was great for the show.
Dave, what about you?
Well, let me ask Coach, what's Mario's weight going to be right now?
154.
Because one of the things, and I'm saying this as a guy who's covered throughout the entire region, but if you remember a couple years ago, we covered, Coach did a show in Amarillo, and Abel Navarrete Jr. stopped a young young fellow, kind of up and comer, not as hot as Abel was.
Waters?
No, it was Dwayne Bonds.
Oh, Dwayne
Okay,
Bonds.
Dwayne Bonds.
yes.
Dwayne Bonds and Abel got a big win, stopped in the second round. Now that was, I think, at 135 or 140.
That was 135, yes, sir.
135. Well, the funny thing about it is, a weird thing happens sometimes in boxing. Dwayne bulked up. He's up to 154 now,
Yep.
and he's really has a nice streak going. After that
Oh,
loss
yes.
to Navarrete, I was like, okay, well, his run as a prospect's probably over here.
Oh, he's
5-0. He beat undefeated Carlos Villalba recently.
Yep.
He just won a pair of fights. I can't remember the opponent's name, but he won a pair of fights against a solid junior middleweight.
Man.
He's at 154 now. He's 9-3 now.
and he holds 2 belts,
And
2
yes,
ABF belts.
and he has 2 ABF belts. I think that would be a good fight.
What's his
Yeah.
record now?
His record is 9-3-1. Now,
9-3-1.
When he fought,
Yeah, write that one down, Coach.
yeah,
I'm-
Sure.
that's a
yes.
fight,
I mean, that. Good on you on that one, because that would be a great fight right there.
It really would, and because Dwayne has really improved and he's gotten bigger. And like I said, he's won, I think, 5 in a row now since the Abel Navarrete fight. So I think we can classify him as a prospect again. Yeah, 9-3. It's not undefeated,
But his streak speaks
he's
for itself.
streaking, and a win over Mario, and there's no doubt about it. He's a prospect.
Oh,
Now
yeah.
we're talking about WBC Continental America or USNBC belts. We're
Absolutely.
talking about some of the regional belts.
And I've been hit up by some of these bigger belts,
Right.
They want to come in and sanction their belts for local up and coming fighter. They have like the WBC FECA belt and stuff like
Right,
that.
yeah.
But man, that is a great fight. That would be a fight I definitely would be interested in putting on. I know Dwayne's been very busy, and unfortunately Mario hasn't. He's been in training, but due to the COVID, we thought we were going to have 10 fights by the end of the year last year.
Exactly.
Unfortunately, I had to cancel 2 shows due to the COVID, but I actually took Carlos Villalba to fight Dwayne Bonds, and Mario was on the undercard. That would be an excellent fight.
Where is Dwayne from?
He's from El Paso.
Is that when I did that show in El Paso when Gonzalez fought over there too?
Yes,
I remember that show. Yeah.
The first guy I cornered, or no, that was I can't remember, but Carlos is the one who lost to him. But he was
Okay.
2-0. He hurt his knee during the fight. I know he wanted a rematch. Carlos is an actual MMA fighter. He never had any amateur boxing, but
We look forward to that fight, Coach. So
man, I'm
make some phone calls.
excited.
I think it'd be a great fight, and like a lot of times when a guy moves from 135 to 154, you start thinking like, man, did he do any road work? Is he going to come in with a little belly or something?
Right.
But no, I mean,
No,
from what I
he's-
can tell, he's bulked up and he's put it on, naturally. And maybe this is a Vinny Pazienza kind of thing where he was maybe not really meant to be 135. Maybe he was meant to be around 147, 154, and so I think it'd be a good fight, and it's a good crossroads fight between two prospects. I will throw 2 other names out for Mario though, as long as we're talking about Mario.
For sure.
One of them, there's a kid out of Albuquerque, and I don't know how feasible this is to be made, because when you're talking about undefeated fighters, everybody starts, people start pricing themselves out,
Oh,
or then
yeah,
it
for
becomes,
sure.
you get into the situation where, well, are you coming to my hometown, or because I'm not going down to Hobbs to fight him,
Exactly.
type of thing. But there's a kid out of Albuquerque named Clinton Chavez who's 4-0.
Oh yeah.
I think that would be a really good fight.
But Clinton fights at 147. I actually just got a call from Eva, who works for Teresa Tapia,
Uh-huh.
and they're putting on a show July 31st in Rio Doso.
Okay.
So I did send in Mario, but not for him. I kind of just sent them a list, but they were kind of interested in Ricardo Reyes,
Oh, that'd be
But
good too.
you're absolutely right, because Clinton's a big kid, and
Yeah.
I'll tell you something about Clinton. He has the most amazing walkout. He's a Native American kid, comes out, he has his family or whoever from his tribe, they come out and they're hitting the drums. I actually recorded the last one where he fought in Albuquerque, but it would be a really good fight. That'd be a tough fight too.
He puts on a show inside and outside of
Inside
the
and
ring.
out, yeah. He's a big 147 pounder. He'll definitely outgrow that one. Who else you got for Mario?
This one, I realize you've tried to make it in the past. I realize that there's a lot of boxing politics involved in this fight that probably we'll see that it'll never happen. But Evan Holyfield out of Houston, Texas,
Oh, yeah.
the son of Evander Holyfield, he's 4-0. I think style-wise that'd be a great fight. The thing is, when you're dealing with a guy with a name like that, they might be looking to to build him up on their terms. And there's nothing wrong with that.
Right.
I'm not saying he's scared or anything like that. I'm not trashing him or anything, but
Right.
you know, you got undoubtedly a lot of people who are trying to build up his career a certain
Right.
way.
And there's probably a lot of people that want to come after him because of
Right,
that name.
Exactly. So he's probably got no shortage of 4-0 fighters who are like, man, I want to beat Holyfield's kid.
Right.
And he's, you know, got
That
he's
would be a
got-
big win.
That would be a huge win.
That's what
but
I'm
I
saying.
think
That's why there's a
style-wise,
target on his back because of
Exactly.
that last name.
But
Yeah, and the fight, we did turn in Mario for Evan before, you know, but it didn't materialize, unfortunately.
Right.
It's just like when Shane Mosley Jr., I offered him Geraldo at one point, and they refused that fight as well, you know. I think
Right.
Shane actually fights tonight
really.
on the who's fighting, Haney and Leonidas.
Right.
I think Shane Mosley Jr. fights tonight.
My favorite fighter coming up out of this area in Southwest, Texas, I got to throw it out there, Abel Bobo Navarrete Jr.
Oh, man.
That guy, that gentleman is a beast. I've seen a lot of, fighters, pro upcoming fighters, and Bobo to me is just on a whole other level compared. Every time I see this guy fight, he dominates.
Oh,
I
yeah.
haven't seen anybody give him even a scare. I mean, I've seen this guy, he goes in with confidence, he walks out with confidence, and he backs down from nobody.
Oh yeah, I remember in Amarillo, I promoted a show up there, and Abel Mendoza ran into the ring like a wrestler, and they, it was Abel, and Abel. Yourself,
I was the ring announcer. Abel
And,
Mendoza was there, and Bobo had just finished fighting, I believe, right?
and Abel just won. I think he beat Dwayne Bonds, maybe.
I think it was Ricky
Or-
Waters,
Rick-
Ricky Rapid Waters.
Yeah, okay, you're right.
I remember. Yeah.
And so we talked about it, and they stirred up the crowd, and then the fight has never happened, man.
I still have that picture. Abel Mendoza was in the ring, and he said he was there to challenge another fighter that was there. And the crowd started yelling, "Fight Bobo, fight Bobo." And I was like, "What do you think about what they're saying?" He said, "Line them up." When he said line them up, later that evening, Abel Bobo Navarrete came out to the ring, and he said, "Let's do this, and let's do this," but it never happened. They both got a little, excited there. The adrenaline caught up on both of them, and Mendoza was saying, he'll fight them under the right conditions and so forth, but he didn't see a reason to fight Navarrete because he wanted to get that WBC belt.
Right.
He said there's nothing in it for him. It's what he kept saying at the moment.
Well, I will say this though, because that is a natural fight, and from what I can tell, there's a little bit of bad blood between the two, which is going to add to that. And I mean, they're two supremely talented fighters, who are next door neighbors. I mean, the last time I saw this happening in New Mexico was when Danny Romero and Johnny Tapia were both at the top of their game, and there was just it was like inevitable that those two were going to fight together in a super fight, a mega fight. And I will say this though, I really think that there's a lot of parity between the two. I think even though like one of Abel Mendoza's defenses, or kind of the thing he's been saying is, listen, I'm 24-0, and Abel
He's got a great
Bobo is
record,
like
yeah.
7-0. Really, they're at equal stages of their career. I'm not saying that one guy's going to win or the other, because that's what I love about this fight is they're really both supremely talented.
That would be a fight to see.
But yeah,
That's my dream
24-0,
matchup right now.
I think
Me
that's
announcing
everybody's, yeah.
Abel announcing the other two Abels. I think that my money is on Abel.
That's a safe bet.
Safe bet.
Safe bet.
Yeah, that would be a great fight. I would love to put it on. I know one Abel Mendoza kind of priced himself too high for me, but maybe we can make it happen in the near future or something. But apparently Abel Mendoza fights at 126 and Abel Navarrete fights at 135. I've seen Navarrete get down to 131 pounds, and I've seen Abel Mendoza fight at 135, 140 pounds.
So they can meet in the middle.
I mean, I think they could. It can be a catch weight. It could be very good. One of the other fights that I talked about earlier was Des Hill versus Louis Luna, but in a boxing match. That's a fight that intrigues me. Des told me to hit up Louis Luna, try to get him to agree to my next Hobbs show.
And both of these guys got a huge fan base of their own.
They have a huge fan base, man. I would like to make it in Odessa, though, but right now I'm going with the New Mexico Commission due to the COVID testing and whatnot from Texas. So Then we have Mark Martinez versus Roman Rendon. That's a heavyweight fight that I like to have. Roman's 2-0, Mark's 1-1. I know Mark knocked down Nick and then hit Nick when he was down.
Tipton, right? Nick
Tipton. So
Tipton.
they disqualified Mark. Mark also wants to fight Nick again, and then the other heavyweight that could be a part of this is Eligio from Clovis, which I got them both on a conversation, telephone three-way call, and they both agreed to fight each other next. You know, Eligio's 6'4", Nick's 6'5".
Wow. Heavyweights.
Nick's 2-1, Eligio's 2-1-1. So you know these are
It's an
fights.
even matchup.
Man,
Those are good
we could
even-
we could do a heavyweight tournament, and it would be great. You know, there's so many different types of fights right there that we can make. Do you have anybody else in mind?
Those are some great fights. I think they'd be exciting fights. You know, I love watching the heavyweight fights. You know, I wrote a book about heavyweight boxing.
You did.
So, you know, I always keep an eye out the heavyweight division. You know, I know when I covered Mark Martinez's last fight against Nick. You know, Mark had a lot of, you know, he had a lot. I mean, he was telling me, and I know he believed it. You know, I'm going to be a contender. I'm gonna take this to the next level. I want to be, you know, I want to be in the talk for like a world title fights down the line. So that loss to Tipton really upended the apple cart for him. If he wants to make that run as a contender, he's going to need to get some big wins. So that's a lot of motivation for a young fighter, you know, to realize, hey, you know, I'm in a position now where I got to work even harder to get to that point. I think a rematch with Tipton would be a fun fight. Nick is a fascinating fighter too, because you know he's just, I mean he kind of reminds me a little bit of like a George Foreman in a way. I mean,
Right.
He comes out, he's got a lot of intensity. He's an intimidating guy. He's the kind of guy, like if you go up to a club and you saw him wearing a black shirt with an earpiece, you're like, I know I ain't messing around. at this
Not with that
place.
bouncer,
Yeah,
right?
Yeah.
So
I'm
now
messing
that-
around here, but you know, it's the one thing I will say about this though is Nick's loss that when I covered his fight in Midland where he lost, you know, I think he had a lot of energy, but I think he maybe burned himself out a little quick. And that's a problem that a lot of young fighters face. You know, you talked about how fighters can get nervous.
They get
and
hyped up.
And that's not knocking any fighter. You know, when you get into the ring, you can hype yourself up. And there's a funny thing is when you're talking about like Gene Perez,
Right.
think about this, like, you know, you can watch an amateur show with a 17-year-old kid who's been doing his road work and is in the best shape of his life. And after a 3-round amateur fight, he's there catching his breath, and he's like, I mean, he's just completely beat. And then you get Gene Perez, and he can take a fight on like 2 days' notice and show up and fight a 10-round fight
And win.
and win
And
be
win.
ready to go another 10 rounds afterwards. And a lot of that is a mental aspect, because Gene's been around the block so many times that he knows how to pace himself, and he knows, and a lot of veteran fighters know that. I think Nick's got to master that, because he's you know, I
Gotta
think he
get that
burned
cardio
himself.
up.
Yeah.
And not to get away from the heavyweights, I'll come back to that here in a second, but Gene Perez and John Herrera, they kind of both have an upside down record, and I remember making them my main event in Roswell, New Mexico. Do you remember that?
Mm-hmm.
And it was a hell of a fight, man.
I
mean,
didn't cover I wasn't there at the fight, but I remember you telling me about it afterwards. And I was like, man.
it was a barn burner for sure. But speaking of heavyweights, Roman Huerta, he's 2-0. I know Nick wants to get that fight back. Of course, Roman and Dez, they betted Nick $10,000. I think it was $5,000 each. So they're definitely game to
Double or
to-
nothing.
to double that fight. Also, that was literally one of the biggest fights I ever made. I mean, in terms of height and weight, it was
money.
it was a good fight for the city, because Nick is from Midland, Roman's from Odessa, and they fought at La Hacienda, which is the middle between Odessa and
Ground zero.
so hopefully we can make that fight happen again. But first, we're gonna do Eligio versus Nick. That's definitely in the works for the next show that they both agreed to. So hopefully we can make it happen.
That'll be a fun one too, because both of those guys have shown a lot of talent in the past. Because Eligio, when he came out, you know, I remember saying, man, this guy's got, you know, he's definitely got some skills. He's got.
Well, he has.
His one loss was due to a leg injury.
He
remember, blew his
right.
knee up, didn't
He blew his knee out. Man, that was a crazy incident. But I know Eligio, he does want to fight, and he's getting his. He just started a new gym, and so can't wait to have him back on our cards. Before we end, I'd like to get your take on your pound for pound list on the in the pros. Do you have a list?
Well, I always try and avoid pound for pound lists because they're so dangerous, and people get so wound up about it. Like obviously we got some great fighters out there. If I
wanna
put
hear
like
this,
Canelo
right.
number 1 and Lopez number 2, it's not because I'm knocking Lopez. It's
Right.
but right now.
But Canelo does have the resume though.
Yeah, he's got the resume, and right now I think it's undisputed Canelo's number 1.
Absolutely.
I really, and you know what? I hate to admit this, but I wasn't exactly a big Canelo fan early on. I kind of thought, he's a little bit developed. He's kind of like a little early on. He had a very flashy record. I remember when he was like, I think he was like 46-0-1 or something like that, or 41-0-1 when he fought Mayweather.
44. Yeah,
Yeah, something like that. But I remember kind of thinking, he's got a.
He was
flashy-
undefeated, right?
He
When
was
he-
undefeated
No.
when he fought.
When he fought Mayweather, he
yes,
was undefeated. That's
yes,
his
he
only
was.
loss.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, you're right.
But I remember kind of thinking, he's a little bit of marketing here. I didn't really think he was as good as he was, but he's proved me wrong. And it's funny because when he was coming up, I remember the day that I first started to kind of warm to Canelo was when I was at Isidro's house and we saw him fight Alfonso Gomez. You remember from the Contender?
yes.
Right.
And I knew Gomez, and Gomez was a guy who always would give you a tough fight, and Canelo just broke him down. And that was where I was like, man, this kid might be pretty good. But even then, I didn't think he'd reach where he is today. And the thing about it, too, is, he is an old school fighter, and you got to respect a guy who's an old school fighter because, he's fighting every couple months. He's staying active. He's giving fans fights. Look at all these other great fighters who, they wait like 10 months between fights, 12 months, even longer between fights, and Canelo's staying active. So.
Let me ask you this question: what's the difference between Canelo versus Mayweather? That Canelo, till the Canelo after Mayweather that you see today. What's the difference in the?
Well, Canelo I think he was like 21 when he fought Mayweather, and Mayweather, I think, fought him at the perfect time. He was on the way up, but Canelo the thing about it is that Canelo was kind of like, he reminded me of like Julio Cesar Chavez.
More of a
he would
brawler.
wear you down, but he wouldn't just like, he wouldn't knock you out with one punch. He was just a brawler, an aggressive fighter who would wear you down. As he's gotten bigger and as he's gotten older, his punching power has gone up a lot. It's incredible how much harder he hits now.
And his defense has gotten better.
And his
That's what I was
defense is-
getting to.
yeah.
But-
To me, that's the biggest difference. The Canelo we saw with Mayweather to the Canelo we see now. I think he
That's-
learned. He definitely learned from Mayweather.
Yeah.
It's hit, don't get hit, and now it's hard to hit Canelo. If you notice his defense.
Because
Yeah.
that fight, the very first fight, or their only fight, it was Mayweather playing chess, Canelo playing checkers. Now it'll be chess versus chess. But I will say this: I think styles make fights. Canelo has improved as a fighter. He did beat like Goto. He beat Mosley. Mosley gave Mayweather some fits, but Mayweather adjusted. When he fought Goto, it was a tough fight for Mayweather. But I do think it would be a different fight. I don't know. I still would think Mayweather would beat him just because it's like a cobra versus a rattlesnake.
Yeah.
Not that Mayweather's stronger, but I think he's a little bit more faster. But now that of course, he's older.
His speed is ridiculous. They were showing a video the other day on Facebook, and his jab is still the best I've ever seen in the game. Mayweather's jab.
And the thing
It's
with
fast.
Mayweather too is like there's probably nobody because there's a lot of fighters who are fast and and they're tremendous athletes and they've got fast hands, but Mayweather knows what you're gonna do before you even know what you're gonna do, and that's I've never seen a fighter because you notice everybody who fought Mayweather, their punch out put went way down.
Yeah.
Mayweather basically frustrated anybody's offense. I remember watching like some of these guys, and they were the take two to land one punch.
Mhm.
There was no take two to land one against Mayweather. It was just basically like, it wasn't even like take two and land zero. It was like standing there waiting, getting peppered by Mayweather, waiting to even throw your punch because Mayweather was such a professor in the ring. He knew what he was doing, and so with that being said, though, I do not want to see him fight that YouTube guy. I don't know.
No, I mean neither.
Yeah.
that was-
Poor guy. Poor YouTube.
Well, I wouldn't say that because in terms of money, the amount of people that he'll bring to to the pay-per-view, for instance, would generate so much money for these guys. I think
And
they're
that's
charging
what it's about.
they're charging $49.95 or whatever, and if they get let's say 1 million sales, they generated 49 million in
Wow.
pay-per-view revenue.
I'm happy for the guys on the undercard for that fight. That's
Absolutely.
what I'm happy
In
for.
fact, I got a kid, Adam Ramirez, out of Albuquerque. I got him on the undercard, so
Oh, excellent.
he'll be flying out there. One of the fights, that right now currently it would be Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence, and man, I think that's a great fight. And in terms of it's crazy to me because I look at everything from their resume, not just their styles. I think that's big when you put somebody on a pound for pound list. Like for me, Canelo is a top fighter, but in terms of fights, that would be the fight right now that I would want. Would be Terrence Crawford versus Errol Spence. I mean, that's a good fight. And then
The thing about this is over my career in covering fights, there's been so many fights that should have happened that the fans wanted to happen, and one thing or another like upended the apple cart. And I don't know if it's like it's always been that way in boxing, but it sure seems like it lately. And
Riddick Bowe versus Lennox Lewis.
that was the first one that came to mind. That fight would have been a huge fight in the 90s, and something always happened with that fight. And it wasn't one fight or another. It was boxing happened. Like when Lennox Lewis got upset by Oliver McCall, there went the Riddick Bowe fight. When Riddick Bowe threw the WBC belt in the trash, when he decided to vacate that belt, instead of doing it like most fighters saying, I'm just going to vacate the belt, he made a big production out of it. It was great for the TV cameras, but then after he lost the WBC or the WBA and IBF belt, WBC was like, we're not doing business with you. And so it turned out to be a real bad thing for his career, especially since now, Lennox Lewis was a WBC champ. So
Right.
it became a hard thing to happen. But we see that in boxing so often. And in the 80s, for you old timers, you remember Larry Holmes was champ, and there was all these young heavyweights coming up, and they were all undefeated, and they'd win a belt, and you'd start getting excited about Larry Holmes versus Michael Dokes, Larry Holmes versus Pinklin Thomas. Well, what happened was these undefeated guys, they'd win the belt, and then like in their first tune-up fight or their first title defense, they'd get upset by somebody, and that fight with Larry Holmes would never materialize.
Yeah.
And that's one of the things why when just last week we were told Anthony Joshua, Tyson Fury, that would have been the biggest heavyweight fight in financially probably ever, and biggest for fight fans probably since the Tyson era.
Yeah.
I mean, it would have been huge. And then, of course, Deontay Wilder had a clause in his contract for a third fight,
That's
and
right.
he wouldn't take step aside money. He wanted that fight.
But he waited till they made the fight.
But
I would have done the same thing. I'm sure,
Yeah.
because he stands to lose a lot of money regardless, and then of course he stands to win the fight. He's got the power to do that. But I think Fury beats him, to be honest with you.
Well, and that's the thing with Wilder is I give him credit for wanting that fight, because really, to be honest, if neutrally speaking, the best thing for Wilder is to take some time, work with his new coach Malik Scott, to develop as a fighter.
Who he fought? Didn't he fight?
Yeah,
Malik
he knocked
Scott?
out Malik Scott as a fighter, but
I think that's going to be his biggest downfall because he got rid of Mark Breland,
who's a great coach.
Who was a great coach, one of the best amateur boxers ever. He was a gold medalist, a world champion, and now he's being trained by somebody he beat. Like, to me, that doesn't do nothing for me. I don't know.
But I don't know though. Sometimes playing devil's advocate here though. Sometimes you just need a change. It doesn't mean that the coach is bad, but you just need a change. You need, for a fighter at that level. And I remember when Vladimir Klitschko, for Wilder in his career, he was having like Jonathan Banks as his coach. Who was a
Right,
guy
right.
who's a fellow ranked contender, and I was sort of like, man, like what's up with that? I mean, this guy's.
But he was trained by Emmanuel Stewart, so
Right.
he had that knowledge, and I think that's big time. But you're absolutely right. And sometimes fighters who aren't that great become great coaches too. So
And that's true. I think one of the best heavyweight coaches for a while there was a guy named Greg Page. Greg
Oh, yeah.
Page worked with Oliver McCall for that aforementioned Lennox Lewis fight, and Greg Page helped Oliver McCall pull off one of the biggest upsets in heavyweight boxing history.
yeah.
But I don't know, what the situation. I know that the Breland situation. Breland got unfairly blamed for the loss. I mean, Breland did a good job, and he's
I
a
would've
good
stopped
coach.
the fight
I would have
myself.
stopped the fight too. But I mean, with that being said, and the other thing too is you can't try and reinvent the wheel. Like
Right.
Deontay Wilder's best style is to try and hit you.
Yeah, I mean,
And
it's wild. It's ugly
it's,
stuff.
it's wild and it's crazy, but like he's got the power that if he hits you, and if you got Deontay Wilder like holding back and not throwing that right hand, you're taking away from his greatest asset. But with that being
Right.
said, Malik Scott might be just what he needs. Just a little change of pace. Somebody who sees this from a different angle. With that being said, I give Deontay Wilder credit because, he wants that fight. He could have easily taken a lot of money to step aside and work a little bit longer with Malik Scott to refine this possibly new style he's got. But no, he wants to fight. And that's what champions do. So I'll give him credit for that.
Absolutely.
I agree. It would have been in his best interest to take this step aside money
And a tune-up fight.
and a tune-up fight. But with that being said, the thing about Deontay Wilder is you can't ever close the book on him because he
No.
hits so hard.
Yeah.
And the other thing I was going to add is this is boxing, and we can't have nice things in boxing, apparently. Every
No.
time there's a big fight,
Something
happens. So I'm starting to get a little nervous here because I'm thinking I want to see this Fury-Joshua fight, but Deontay Wilder might land one of his wild right hands, upend the apple cart, because this is boxing, and we could then, be much farther away from having that super fight.
Well, and then if Wilder fights Joshua, that'd be pretty intriguing as well.
That
so.
would be a fun one. But
Well-
the one thing I will add though is nobody should sleep on Usyk, the number one
Right,
contender,
right.
because
Well, I think Joshua has to fight him next.
well, that's the thing is Joshua was talking about fighting a third fight with Andy Ruiz, and don't get me wrong, you probably get more money for fighting Andy Ruiz.
For sure.
And you've already beaten him in the last fight. Now Ruiz, of course, won the first fight, but Usyk is a dangerous guy, and it might be better, on a business standpoint, to give up the WBO belt, let Usyk win the WBO belt. Or let him fight Joe Joyce for the WBO belt, and then if you have to fight Usyk, at least then you get a little bit more,
Right.
you get more money out of it because now we got a champion involved, and we got a guy who beat a recognizable fighter in the UK in Joyce. So,
Right.
Exactly.
but the problem with all these scenarios is that unified four belt
Oh, yeah.
champion.
Too many belts
Yeah.
in boxing.
There
One,
is.
one fight that I would have liked to see would have been David Tua versus Mike Tyson.
Oh, that would be great.
Evander Holyfield fought a who's who of fighters. So anybody Evander fought is absolutely war. But David Tua versus Mike Tyson would have been a great fight. And Ike Ibuchi, who could have been great, man. But due to a rape, he beat David Tua. He would have fought well against anybody as well. A lot of people really didn't know of him. He's an African fighter.
I remember when he knocked out Chris Bird, and that was just Chris Bird was from Flint, Michigan, and that's where I was living at the time, and I followed Chris carefully, his career, and Chris was the most elusive fighter I'd ever seen fight, with the possible exception of Floyd Mayweather.
Right.
But,
Well,
he
I mean,
fought-
he was a middleweight
Right.
coming out of the Olympics, who became a heavyweight fighter and became a world champion at that.
Heavyweight champ, yeah, and I remember when he fought,
And he wants to fight again.
yeah, I saw that.
That's
but
too bad. I mean,
I will say this though, when Ibuchi fought Chris Bird and he landed that, when he knocked out Chris Bird in the 5th round, I mean that was just, at that moment I was like, man, this Ike is going to be a world champion, and it was a shame that, unfortunately he got into his legal problems and his situation,
I think he's about to get out of prison if not.
Well, the fight that hasn't happened that I've been waiting to see happen is Ryan Garcia versus Tank Davis. These two guys, I'm a big fan of watching these two guys fight. Both of these guys have tons and tons of power, and that's the fight that hasn't happened that needs to happen.
That's a good fight. Ryan makes a lot of mistakes, though. He has his chin up too high, and Tank's.
The kid he just fought, the guy that just
Yeah,
knocked him on his
Campbell?
butt. Yeah, okay,
Yeah.
when Campbell knocked him down, and I've been a fan of Ryan, but when I started seeing how he's been acting, he's changed his attitude. He's gotten very cocky. He's talking too much smack, and that wasn't the Ryan Garcia I started watching. And now that I saw that when he fought Campbell and when Campbell knocked him on his behind, I actually said, good,
Well,
now
show him.
get up and humble yourself and become a boxer again. Don't be a superstar. Be a
Uh,
boxer.
And that Campbell was an Olympian as well.
Oh, Campbell
So
was no
you
walkover. Yeah.
One thing I will say about this, I wasn't a big Ryan Garcia fan until I was approached by Joel Ojeda, who unfortunately his daughter passed away of cancer. We had raised some money for
The bearded referee.
the bearded referee. He reached out to me and he said, "Hey, I got a kid. He has cancer. He lost his eye, and he said his goal is to meet Ryan Garcia." And they had like kind of like a Make-A-Wish type deal. So I got in touch with a buddy of mine who got in touch with Golden Boy, and then I got Ryan Garcia's number, passed it on to these people. They actually flew, or the family, I think a family of 4 or 5, to Dallas, and they sat on ringside and they got to meet him.
That's awesome.
So that I became a fan, of him. In that 135 pound, there are some very intriguing fights. I know Tank actually has a tough fight. I think he's stepping up in class to fight Barrios. That should be a very entertaining fight. But there's you got Lopez, who could fight any of them guys. He could actually move up to 140 pounds and fight Josh Taylor. Josh Taylor, who just beat Ramirez, could also jump up to welterweight. Josh Taylor's an undisputed 140 pound champ. He could move up to welterweight and fight Terrence Crawford. I think they're both promoted by Top Rank. So there's some very good fights there that could be made, man.
Do you think it'll ever get made, that fight between these two guys? I mean, how long is it going to take to build up the hype and to get Davis and Garcia in the ring together?
Well, it's all politics. You got one that's promoted by Golden Boy, and you have another one that's promoted by, I think, Al Heyman. So it's more politics than anything else.
That's the fight I'm
That's
excited
sad
about.
that
Hopefully,
they're-
we'll get to see that soon.
It's sad about that.
I just would throw out this though too. You talked about Garcia getting dropped early in his career, but let's not forget that if you're bringing up a fighter, you don't want to like pad his record, and they're going to have tough fights. A good fighter is going to have a tough fight early on, and I will throw this out. I remember when Oscar De La Hoya was coming up, and he fought tough early on. I remember his I think his fourth professional fight was against Jeff Mayweather, who was had 28 fights at the time. It was 25-4 or something like that. I mean, they did not spend any time trying to pad De La Hoya, and he fought a guy. I think his 7th pro fight was Narciso Valenzuela, and Narciso Valenzuela had a 34-13 record, and he knocked down De La Hoya.
Oh, nice.
He knocked down De La Hoya in the first round, and De La Hoya came back and knocked him out. And then 2 fights later, he fought Giorgio Campanella, who's an Italian guy, and Campanella knocked him down. So, at the time, a lot of people covering De La Hoya's career were like, man, he's already been dropped twice. And, my counter was like, man, yeah, but Campanella was a world champ and a 20-0, and De La Hoya was, fighting him,
Up-and-coming fighter, yeah.
a young up-and-coming fighter with 10 fights, and he was fighting this guy. And so,
Right.
so I wouldn't read too much into the knockdown on Garcia just yet, but, we got to see how this develops and how that fight's going to.
But the good thing is we got a lot of good stuff coming up in the future with fights, with local fights, pro fights. Everything's coming up soon. You guys stay tuned. We want to thank everybody. We're going to go ahead and close out. Thank you for joining us on this $4 production podcast here with Coach Cedro. Mr. David Finger, thank you for joining us again,
you.
Coach. Thank you again for having us.
Thank
And
you.
we look forward to our next podcast where we're hoping to have a special guest, whether it's through Skype or even here, on the set with us on our next podcast.
Des Hill will be here for the next podcast, but hopefully we can get somebody on Skype and do a live interview with a world champion.
Awesome. So once again, thank you everybody for being here and
Thank you,
joining us on the
Corey.
podcast.
With Athlete to me for coming down and being our production.
Awesome
man.
job. Thank you, Mr. Finger. Again, thank you,
Thank you.
for being here
Appreciate
with us, Coach Cedro.
Thank you.
It's a pleasure. Hope to see everybody on our next podcast. You guys stay tuned.